Hey everyone, ErikOnPaper here, and in case you hadn't figured it out, I'm Erik. So we're going to be doing a cool drawing today, the lizard as portrayed in Spider-Man 4, and I'm going to break down some techniques as well as talk about the lizard's role in the movie and how he's going to be accomplished. So I'm looking forward to this one. So we're going to start roughing out the pose of the lizard, and one of the things I definitely like to do is to plan the pose ahead of time, and I knew I wanted the lizard to be reaching out to you because you're drawing on a two-dimensional surface, and what you really want to do is create that illusion of 3D depth and space. So I have his hand massively foreshortened, and you don't add a lot of detail at this stage. You're just trying to figure out the body and how it's placed and what the most dynamic pose for the lizard will be. You can see here, adding in the head details, it's obviously not a human head, and the funny thing is, Dead On, the lizard design from our movie, kind of reminds me a little bit of Herb Trimp's Godzilla from the Marvel run in the 70s, which I'm a fan of. Now, when I'm doing the preliminary pencils and line work for a character like this and a pose like this, I try to keep the line work pretty loose and sketchy. That way you can preserve the kinetic energy and the chaotic feeling of the piece. If I'm penciling something like a pinup or just a more placid everyday pose, I take a little bit longer and really refine the details because the figure's at rest and you're supposed to not look as rough and sketchy. Now going in with the inks, I go in with the micron and really start to get to work on those fine details, making the mouth very dark on the inside to create depth. But really, on a piece like this, you can go with a Micron 08 marker because it's thicker and you need more line delineation when you're working on an 11 by 17 canvas. And I'm making it in a pretty sketchy style to go along with the line work and to keep it looking fierce. So now about the lizard's role in Spider-Man 4. He's not going to be the primary focus the way the lizard was in the Amazing Spider-Man movie with Andrew Garfield. If anything, I would say that the Kurt Connors Peter Parker relationship as teacher and student or mentor respectively in this script is really the focus, and the lizard more is used as the muscle for the primary antagonist, which is the vulture. So one of the scenes I am really looking forward to filming is the fight with Spider-Man and Lizard in the sewer. They're going to have multiple fights in the movie, and each of them has a different flavor. And in this case with the Lizard, since this is a continuation of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, I've been studying Sam Raimi's horror films quite a bit because even in that first Spider-Man movie, he was able to get a pretty good jump scare in there. I think you'll know what I'm talking about with the Green Goblin pretending to be a woman, like an old lady in the burning building. And Spider-Man goes to rescue her and it turns around as a goblin reveal. I saw that movie in theaters as a kid. Scene makes me jump. I know it's coming up. Every time I'm watching, I'm like, oh god. Now, jumping back more to the art tutorial part of this is I didn't add a lot of detailing in the pencil work because I knew it would be kind of superfluous to do that. I just added most of my details with inking. It took me a while to feel confident to do that, adding a lot of bumps and ridges to the lizard's skin and adding the texture to the sewer arches and things like that. But I'm just going in with a lot of feathering here to give it that dimensionality and texture that will really make it stand out. So yeah, the Kurt Connors character is played by a fantastic actor, Bill Reed Jr., and he is actually somebody I auditioned for another project, and very talented man. I've been looking forward to working with him, and when I found out he was cast, I was ecstatic. And he's going to bring a lot to the role of Kurt Connors. So now I'm dyeing the paper with my Copic markers. And I know that this is going to be a very dark piece because I wanted to reflect the atmosphere that we're going to portray in the film. So what I'm doing here is going in with much lighter Copic colors, because the colored pencils I'm going to use to give it its final rendering are going to be much darker. And if I went too dark with the markers, then I would be unable to really have any of the pencils read. Here I tried a little experiment with the water, wasn't too happy with it, I knew I'd go back later. Now here I initially tried dyeing the background with a yellow color, and it wasn't feeling right, so I just went in with some blues and blue-greens to try to blend it in, because overall my vision for this scene is it's going to be a very blue-green scene, and Spider-Man's red will stand out and pop in the scene and make it easier to track and follow, because we're in the lizard's territory, and Spidey knows it, and I want the audience to feel like they're in danger with him. The interesting thing about the lizard in this story, as I said earlier, is that he is a threat, but he's not the primary A plot, and Bryn and William, who wrote the script, did a really good job putting together a cast of villains that fit well into the Raimi universe, but it's not going to have the Spider-Man 3 problem of too many villains. It's balanced quite well. And Peter Parker and Kurt Connors reflects the theme of the often said, with great power comes great responsibility. And what I'm doing here is, even in the dark areas, I filled in with a little bit of blue-green, just because you don't want to have any white showing through. And now going in with the colored pencils for the rendering, there's only a limited amount of reds here, so I use that as kind of a warm-up for the texturing, figuring out where I wanted the lighting to be on the underside of the tongue, like splashing up from the water, and then overhead, just for a little more dimensionality. Art has to look good. It doesn't always have to make sense. At least I keep telling myself that. So just going in and with lighter pencils over darker ones to fill in that detail. And what I tried to do, even in the Copic stage, was to be mindful of where the light was coming from. I wanted one overhead and one underneath, nothing directly at the lizard. So that's what I'm trying to reflect with the colored pencils. And it's a process of building it up. I start with the highlights, adding a blue and then a green to that blue, darkened in the scales that I'd penciled in or inked in, and then just working the shadows, blending it, going back and forth many layers to get the result that you want. And there was some trial and error, and that's the fun part of art. And if you make a mistake, learn how to incorporate it into your art. It's kind of the same way as making a movie. You are never going to have everything that you want 100% on a film set, so you have to learn how to compromise and improvise, and sometimes you can get even a better result. So with the design of the lizard for Spider-Man 4, we wanted it to look as much like the Sam Raimi version would have, because he liked the Silver Age comics and wanted to keep that aesthetic, and Bryn and the concept artist felt strongly about that, and this was before I signed on as a director, but I agreed with them. The funny thing is that Bryn even found a way to have Kurt Connors / the Lizard in his iconic purple pants, so we can have him match his first appearance. It won't be that way throughout the movie, but I feel that it's enough of a tribute and something that Raimi would have done. So even though we are building a articulated lizard suit, and it is looking fantastic, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be probably the largest suit in the movie, because the actor playing the lizard is actually going to be on stilts. To have him tower over Spidey and get that menacing factor in there. There is going to be some digital touch-ups to him, things like eye blinks, tongue flicks, and some of the action will be impossible for us to do without a digitally generated lizard, but you would get that in almost every kind of movie. And we're going to be doing scans of the costume. That will be for the CGI modeling team, and there will be no difference between the lizard suit and the CGI model. Now here, when the water is splashing up on the lizard, when I'm filling it in with pencil, I want to keep in mind the shadow from the lizard's pants coming down onto his knee, but also having the water splash back up would give a blue-green cast to his legs, so I have to keep that in mind and just make that feathering feel smooth and natural. And I like to go one color at a time, or one series of colors at a time, so that's why I did all the greens first, so I can keep them consistent and not have to keep unpacking and repacking the same colored pencils. And I like to use the Faber-Castell pencils. For me, they're nice and soft and give a real good painterly-like feeling if you put in enough time and learn how to use them right. The interesting thing about the lizard in our script is, like in the comics, most of Spider-Man's villains have a personal connection to Peter Parker. And that's something that the Raimi trilogy of movies, I think, did really well in that translation. It made the stakes higher and made the fights a lot more personal. In this case, the lizard's very much a Jekyll and Hyde, and I think the audience will feel pity for Kurt Connors. That duality was something I always liked about the lizard, and why Spidey holds back when fighting him, even though he's one of his greatest physical threats. We are designing his first transformation sequence to really be iconic. Um, it's going to be akin to, well, I think the lizard and the way Raimi would have directed him would be a very horror version. Like, if you saw what Raimi wanted to do with Venom as opposed to what the studio actually did with Venom in Spider-Man 3, well, let's just say a lot more people would have been happy, because that maquette that they built was quite terrifying, very comic accurate, but the response was, no, he's too frightening and might not sell enough toys. Well, as fans, and this being a fan film, we don't have that kind of restriction. We're able to tell the best story in the most faithful way to the source material possible. Now, going in here was kind of tough to figure out the lighting on his lab coat, because too white and he's just going to look like he's glowing in the middle of the darkness. And then I was looking at the background and realized, you know what, this yellow is just not working for me. It's not how it's going to look in the final film. So I went in and started penciling it over with, as you can see, this blue-green color, and then I'm going to go back in with other greens, lighter blues, and some black just to darken it up more. You don't want to rely on your black pencil too much as an artist. You prefer to go to just darker shades of colors, because few things in nature or the world are pure 100% black. But that being said, it's not a hard and fast rule I follow. I happen to like the richness that you can get, and especially playing with darker values. So after I fixed up the background, this is more akin to what I imagined the color grading as in the final look of the scene to be. This leads me to another thing I wanted to say to my fellow creatives. If you're artists, writers, actors, directors, filmmakers, any creative medium, creative storytelling medium you can think of, is that just because you've done some work doesn't mean you're always headed in the right direction. It's okay to go back. It's okay to revise. You should never settle, because this work will always have your name on it, and you'll improve, of course. And like, I look at my artwork, even from a couple months ago, and think, oh geez, I posted that on Instagram? What was I thinking? But the point is, you don't need to worry too much if you've done your best. People will see that, you'll see your own improvement. Now what I'm doing here is adding in more texture to the claws, emphasizing the rim light around the edges of the claws, giving it a lot more detail than if they just were there flatly. And yes, I did use the black I was talking about to give it a bit more of a sheen, like the lizard has been sharpening his claws on stones all day getting ready for the kill. Now the water here was interesting. I wanted it to stand out from the rest of the environment, so I decided to render it mostly with Copics and going in with blue greens, darker blues, mostly keeping everything muted to match the rest of the environment and use harsher colors. And to help this look a little more realistic, I went in with a white pastel pencil and started going over all of the black lines to give it more of a feather and more of that water spray that you would actually see. And I colored in some of the areas where I'd penciled in the water spray, and I just go in with a white gel pen and start refilling those areas. And it's not going to be a perfect fill because the texture of the paper has been altered, but that's okay. It makes it look a lot more natural. And here's the completed lizard piece. Oh, and one detail I forgot to mention is that I also used the white gel pen to add highlights under his chin and around here just to help separate the head from the body. And this has been the most work-intensive drawing to date, but I love doing it. So thank you for watching and keep telling your story.